sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, let's jump right in today. We're tackling immigration policy and specifically temporary protected status, TPS. You sent over this CBS News piece. It's from January 10th, 2025. Pretty recent. It's about Biden extending TPS for almost 1 million immigrants. And, well, the timing is pretty wild with the new administration about to take over.
Yeah. What really jumps out is how this extension covers so many people from, all these different countries. They're all here for different reasons, but now they kind of have this, shared uncertain future in the U.S.
It really does feel like we're seeing global turmoil play out right here. But before we get into all that, maybe just for anyone listening who might not be totally familiar, could you explain what exactly is TPS and what does it actually do for people?
Sure. It's actually more complex than the name might suggest. It says temporary right there, but it's not just some simple visa. It's a program that lets people already here in the U.S. stay and work legally if going back home would be, dangerous. We're talking armed conflict, natural disasters, things like that. What's interesting is it gives them both work permits and protection from deportation, which is, huge if you qualify.
I feel like the word temporary is doing a lot of work here. This article mentioned Salvadorans who've been living in the U.S. under TPS for over 2 decades. That's longer than some people have lived in their home countries.
Exactly. It's granted for set periods, usually 6 to 18 months, but it can be extended over and over if the danger back home hasn't gone away. And as you said, those conditions, sometimes they just don't improve, not for years, sometimes decades. So you have people who build whole lives here, families, careers, all while this temporary status is hanging over their heads. It creates this really complex situation.
Which takes us to the next thing. Who's actually benefiting from Biden's extension? This article throws a lot of numbers around.
Right. It's roughly, 234,000 Salvadorans, 1,900 Sudanese, 104,000 Ukrainians, and then a big one, 600,000 Venezuelans. Just to give you an idea, 600,000, that's almost the entire population of Nashville, Tennessee. Think about what it would mean for those folks, their families, their communities, if they had to go back.
Wow. Yeah, it's staggering. And what gets me is how each of these groups, they have such different stories about how they ended up here in the U.S. under TPS. Talk about a mix of experiences.
Yeah, you've hit on something important. It shows how TPS is really a response to this whole range of global crises. You have the Salvadorans, they've been here the longest since those terrible earthquakes back in 2001. It's a classic example of how natural disasters can force people to leave their homes. And then you have the Venezuelans, they're a much more recent group. They're fleeing economic collapse, political chaos. Their story shows how those things, they can be just as disruptive as any earthquake or hurricane. People have to seek safety somewhere.
Right, and then we have the Ukrainians who came after the Russian invasion. The article even mentions how some came through regular border crossings, but others, they used these special sponsorship programs. It's pretty interesting to see how, even within the same crisis, people take such different paths to find refuge.
It really highlights how everyone's story is different, even if they share that same TPS status.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, a big question mark. This new administration, what's it going to mean for all these people?
Yeah, this article points out that the incoming Trump administration, they've been pretty clear about their opposition to TPS. Trump and Vance haven't exactly been quiet about it. They've called it overextended, even tried to end it during Trump's first term, but they hit some legal roadblocks.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so tense. On one hand, you've got Biden extending TPS. Some might see that as a last-ditch effort to protect people. But then you have the incoming administration, and they've said they might want to dismantle the whole thing.
Sounds like we're about to see this, tug of war, legal and political. And it makes you wonder who's going to get caught in the middle.
It's true, and sometimes I think the human cost gets lost in all the debate. But it's so important. Think about the anxiety, the fear. These families, they just don't know what's coming next, not even a few months out, let alone years.
And to make things even more complicated, Biden chose not to expand TPS to include new arrivals, even with, all that pressure from activists. This article mentions Nicaraguans and another 450,000 Venezuelans who, they could have qualified. It feels like maybe a missed opportunity, especially given how uncertain things are for them.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions, and the timing is, very interesting. Expanding TPS right before a new administration comes in, it could be seen as like a provocation. Some people say it could even make things worse for the whole program. Makes you wonder if Biden's trying to walk this fine line, offer some relief, but not start a huge political fight over TPS.
So is this like a strategic move, trying to protect the program by not pushing too hard? Or is it just politics as usual, where every decision carries a ton of weight? Feels like we've got more to unravel here, and that's what we're going to do in our next segment. We'll be right back to keep digging in to temporary protected status. Okay, we're back, and last time we really got into the weeds with temporary protected status, who it helps, how they got here, and this political storm brewing with the new Trump administration. Yeah. There's a lot to think about.
We were talking about Biden's decision not to expand TPS to new arrivals, even though there was pressure to do so. It's a good example of the conflict between helping people right now and making sure the program can even survive in the long run.
It does feel like everyone's making these strategic moves, but with real people's lives hanging in the balance. Beyond the politics, though, there's this basic question that keeps coming up. What happens to those already under TPS if the program just goes away? Is it a temporary Band-Aid, or could it, maybe lead to something more permanent, like a pathway to residency? Maybe.
That's the million-dollar question. And to be honest, the article doesn't give us any easy answers. You have people who think TPS should be just what it says, temporary. They say it's meant to give people a safe place to be until things get better back home, and then they should go back. It's about helping them through a tough time, not necessarily giving them a new life here, permanently.
Right, but then you have others who see it as like a stepping stone, a chance to build a real future in the U.S., especially those who've been here for years. They've built lives, started families, sending them back to a country they may not even remember, maybe with kids who were born here in the U.S. It just seems, unfair somehow.
It does get complicated, especially with all the legal fights and political arguments around TPS. This article mentions how the Trump administration tried to end it for a bunch of people in their first term, but those legal challenges stopped them.
So even if they want to limit TPS, they might run into the same legal problems again.
Exactly. A lot of those cases, they come down to how you define temporary and how you decide if a country is really safe enough for people to go back. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. That's where the courts come in. And these cases, they don't just affect a few people. They set the rules for everyone.
It's almost like we're watching this legal drama play out, but the stakes are incredibly high. And in the middle of it all are nearly 1 million people just waiting to see what happens. It's kind of overwhelming, honestly.
It is a lot to take in, and it's easy to focus on the political side, the legal arguments. But we can't forget, these are real people with hopes, dreams, anxieties, families, communities, the fabric of what makes up America. Their stories matter, and we need to hear them.
Totally agree. This isn't some theoretical debate. It's about the human impact of decisions that get made. We're talking about people who've put down roots, contributed to the economy, become part of the American story. So knowing the political climate, the legal hurdles, what are the options? What could actually happen? It feels like we're at a turning point.
One possibility is that the new administration tries to get around those legal issues. Maybe they make the rules for TPS stricter, make it harder to qualify or harder to renew, not ending it completely, but making it tougher to stay.
So a less direct approach, but still a big deal for the people affected.
Right. Another thing that could happen, we've talked about it, is that this just leads to another round of legal battles. And who knows how long that could take? Years, maybe? And all that time, people are living with this uncertainty.
It must be incredibly stressful, not knowing if you can stay in the place you've called home for years, maybe even your whole life. It makes you think, what's the right thing to do here? What's the fair and humane way to handle TPS? Is it about helping people build a permanent life here, or making sure they can return home safely when it's safe?
Those are really the big questions, aren't they? And they're at the heart of what we're talking about. And now I want to ask you, the listener, what do you think? What should happen to those living here under TPS? Should there be a path to citizenship? Should it be temporary no matter what? Or is there some other option, something we haven't even thought of? Think about it. We'll be back in a bit to wrap up our deep dive on temporary protected status.
All right, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into temporary protected status. We've gone over a lot. from like the nuts and bolts of how TPS works to the political and legal stuff around it.
And we've really tried to look at the human side of this whole thing, to think about what it's like for those people who are, directly affected by the program. It's a good reminder that policies, they aren't just these ideas. They have real consequences for real people, families, entire communities.
You left our listeners with a pretty big question to consider. What should the outcome be for folks living here under TPS? It makes us think about, like, what we value as a country, what's fair, what it means to be a nation built on immigration.
It's a tough question. There are no easy answers, right? But it's something we as a society, I think we have to grapple with. And we got to do it with, some thought and compassion. I mean, as we see more and more people displaced around the world, these questions about temporary protection programs like TPS, they're only going to get more urgent.
This CBS article, it's focused on what's happening right now with Biden's extension and what might happen with Trump coming back. But maybe it's helpful to step back for a second. Look at the bigger picture. What does TPS mean long term? Not just for individuals, but for the U.S. as a whole. Like, what have we learned from how we've handled it in the past? And how can we use those lessons to make our immigration system more just and fair?
Those are the right questions to be asking, and they need careful thought. We need to listen to all sides. It's easy to get caught up in all the political stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about finding ways to help people, to do things that are right, that recognize how immigrants contribute to our country.
One thing that really struck me is how long some people have been here under TPS. We're talking decades for some folks. They've built lives here, raised families, contributed to their communities. When does temporary stop meaning temporary? Like, at what point do we acknowledge those deep roots and start thinking about more permanent options?
That's really the heart of it, isn't it? It's this tension between temporary and something more. And I don't think there's one easy answer. But what we need is, honest conversation. We have to listen to those who are living under TPS, understand what they're going through, and consider all the different possibilities.
That's a great point. This isn't about choosing sides or playing politics. It's about seeing the human side of things and working toward, a better future for everyone.
So we've explored how TPS works legally, the political battles, the human stories. We've asked you to think about the future, to have these conversations about immigration.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you some insights, maybe even made you ask some new questions.
As our world becomes more and more interconnected, these issues, they aren't going away. To find solutions, we need empathy, we need to listen to each other, and we need to find common ground.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep talking about these important issues.